Thank our dear colleagues at CDP, in particular Andrea Montanino and Laura Riano for joining us and hosting this event. We are going today to discuss the role of public development banks in promoting sustainable agriculture. Today we have 4 panelists, 1 keynote speaker, Laura Viganò. I will first introduce her and then the 3 panelists later on. Laura, you are a professor of economics specialized in financial intermediaries. You are live from the University of Bergamo, where you teach in particular bank management. You have sat in the board of financial institutions, and in general, you are interested in the particular role of banks in sustainable finance and also risk management. You have wrote a few papers on natural disasters, typically, and the coverage of risk. So without further delay, we're going to listen to Laura Viganò's keynote lecture for around 15 minutes. And then we'll join Wencai Zhang from the Agricultural Development Bank of China, Souleymane Waigalo, Directeur Général de la Banque Nationale de Développement Agricole du Mali. And next to me, we have Alejandra Riano, Senior Research Fellow at IDDRI, who will discuss the alignment of PDBs with the SDGs. So first, we are going to listen to Laura Viganò. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you. Good afternoon to this distinguished audience. I kindly ask to show the slides if possible, so I can start my presentation.
We can see your slides, Laura.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much. So I'm very pleased to be here to present this paper on the role of PDBs in promoting sustainable, green and inclusive finance for food systems. The paper is based on selected relevant literature, and it has an introductory part on demand and supply of finance, and then a core part on PDBs, especially on green and inclusive finance. I hope it advances. I'm using the remote control. Okay, yeah, perfect. Sorry. Just one moment to get acquainted to the system because it doesn't go forward. Maybe I need that it's controlled by the room because.
Laura, maybe I can do it if you tell me to change slides each time, okay?
Yeah, I think it's better because it doesn't respond to my command. So can you please turn to the next slide? Thank you. So the focus is on micro, small and medium enterprises and smallholders. Why? Because of their magnitude for the role they have in food supply and because they are still unserved. So several studies analyze the financing gap, and outcomes are quite different one another because of the type of the sample that they use and the type of intermediaries that they considered and of final beneficiaries. But there is consensus on the lack of finance, and we are talking about hundreds of billions of US dollars, especially when we talk about long-term finance. 2 warnings. One is that this estimate does not actually correspond to the actual demand for finance because this should be expressed by potential borrowers who should be able and willing to repay. And the other, let's say, warning is that we should not only measure the gap in finance, but the gap in the supply of a whole range of financial services and even of non-financial services that are supporting the access to finance. Please, next. Who are the actors in on the supply side? The traditional ones, among which the public development banks, but new fund providers that are increasingly interesting. For example, institutional investors or social investors that are very sensitive to the social impact of their actions. And the sustainable debt market that has increased issuances in recent years, particularly last year. The literature shows that a winning approach should be the value chain finance approach because it can assure a better offer of financial services, more effective and reduce the risks, and also should be more inclusive. However, smallholders apparently are not yet included in this value chain finance process, fully included. And this is why the concept of customer centricity is increasingly considered important, embracing the idea that there should be a holistic household view in the provision of financial services, satisfying the diversity of demand for financial services. What is the role of PDBs in this landscape? Well, the relevant literature shows an important contributions of PDB in terms of percentage covered with the offer of funds from PDBs as compared to the other actors in the market. Next, please. So PDBs are actually very different from the past. After the failure of the supply-led finance approach and the insufficient impact of private sector in the provision of these services in the subsequent market view, PDBs are now standing as ideal gap fillers. Why? Because they are public in nature, but they act as private actors and they use mass market instruments. They may have a counter-cyclical role and they are expected to focus on sectors that are not particularly deemed interesting by the private sector, while, for example, the infrastructural one or those with positive externalities but not sufficiently remunerative. And this is also why they should play a role in climate finance, in climate change finance. Next slide, please. This slide is just a landscape of public development banks. I only want to draw your attention on the down left type of bank, the minilateral ones that are regional banks that are owned by the recipient countries. And this has implications on their ability to get funds, as we will see later on. Next, please. Well, the landscape is really diversified. The study focuses mainly on national development banks because of the number of them, hundreds of national development banks operating, because they focus on the last mile, because they focus, most of them focus on the agricultural and rural sector. The studies and statistics are quite diversified because also in this case, sample sizes and characteristics are different and also the time of observation. However, we can draw some trends. So how effective are PDBs and what are their challenges and what the suggestions that we can make? I can already anticipate that not all PDBs achieve their full potentials in mobilizing resources for green and inclusive finance and in delivering suitable products. Why? Because they still suffer from limitations in the business model and in capacity. So in order to fulfill fully their potential, they should strengthen both their financial and their social performance. Next, please. I tried to analyze some of these features by looking at the structure of assets and liabilities first, because this is related to their mandates, to the governance, which in turn affects performance, social and financial performance and impact. Next, please. In terms of function, PDBs actually have proven to be effective with their counter-cyclical role, especially during the global financial crisis, but not all the PDBs experience these trends, and providing finance is still a challenge. In fact, while mandates actually are increasingly including sustainable inclusive finance in their statements, but for example, in the case of inclusion, even if NDBs play a great role in financing micro, small and medium enterprises, still this sector is underserved. And in terms of climate-related finance, they are the highest contributors among public funders, but their actions are still considered as fragmented and not fully incorporated in the strategies. The PDBs claim that the farmer hesitates in implementing climate-friendly techniques and that they can hardly measure impact because of information, lack of information and lack of instruments. Next, please. I'd like to spend a few words on leverage, because leverage is always judged as a positive issue for development banks because they can mobilize resources and invest them into the economy. But I would like to stress that this makes sense if the quality, financial and social quality of assets is good. So On the social quality, this inability to systematically measure the impact makes the evaluation a little bit difficult. On the financial side, while we have outstanding performances in several banks, there are a non-negligible number, I would say, that are not profitable yet. Non-performing loans are a problem, but other risks also affect these banks. And the regulation should keep this bank aligned with the risk management, but some papers raise the issue of the not full suitability of this regulation for public development banks. And one key point relates to subsidies received and given by the PDBs that should be accounted for, both in terms of usage and of impact on the financial performance. Annual reports are found to be not fully informative, especially on the social aspect of performance. Next, please. In terms of financial products offered, there are PDBs that are quite innovative and that can offer extremely good practices, but other PDBs still rely on traditional instruments and have very little access to innovation. Another limitation that I found is that some PDBs are not able to really reach effectively the last mile. In terms of funding, of course, the role of multilateral and regional development banks is acknowledged in de-risking them, but this international market is not accessible to the smallest ones, especially in lower income countries. I make the example of the minilateral development banks because being owned by recipient countries with not high ratings, they have really limited ability to be de-risked by these minilateral banks. So the last aspect is governance that is increasing. It is often mentioned in the papers as a critical point, often related to the public ownership of these banks. However, we can see excellent examples of performance in fully owned, state-owned development banks. So it means that the suitable processes and procedures are more important than ownership. Just final suggestions. Next, please. One is a general one, so there should be probably a more explicit focus on in mandates on SDGs, green and inclusive finance, and this should be internalized also in daily operations. To be more concrete, this means have increased efforts and to focus more on inclusive and green finance. There are several lessons learned that can be drawn by the literature. There are experiences and best practices available that could be generalized. For example, innovation in instruments, in the portfolio product compositions, in incentives that can be made available to encourage in working in green finance through guarantees or innovative collateral. One key element that appears in these successful case studies, I put some in the appendix of the paper, is the quality of the bank customer relationship that should be strengthened. And this means, for example, for first-tier banks to improve, to extend better their branch networks, and for second-tier banks to choose the right partner, maybe with linkage models. Products and innovation. In these successful examples, innovation plays a big role in processes and in products. For example, they stress the possibility to extend to risk management solutions the range of products offered to the smallholders and micro, small, and medium enterprises. But what is important is that technical assistance plays a very strategic role, both offered to borrowers to make their investment more appealing to the bank and more bankable and also more successful, but also offered to financial service providers that thanks to technical assistance can develop innovative products. So the case studies illustrate that PDBs can be able to serve, to achieve both the sustainable and inclusive target. So these case studies could be shared. The sharing of experiences and best practices among PDBs is strategic in this respect. Please, next slide. Okay, the first column deals with performance. I already spent words on that. I think that a break-even should be a precondition for development banks. So accent on quality of assets, on quality of loans, on lending processes, on risk management and diversification, accounting for subsidies and what I said before. But especially it's important also to account for the social performance. It's not easy because impact is still a challenge, but outcomes of actions and additionality should be accounted for and measured in order to prove the effectiveness of action. The second column concentrates on funding. I put the accent on bond issuances because they appear to be increasingly attractive. But in this respect, those banks that have little assets should be supported in this process. And in order to attract international investors, maybe an improved impact measurement and sustainability ratings may make these bonds more attractive. But what can really work in an effective way is this idea of blended finance partnerships that are often mentioned in the literature, where public and private funds are put together so that there can be an offer with different types of products with different risk return features that attract different types of investors. And in this respect, PDBs can really play a role because they can be coordinating these partnerships and, just to quote a contribution in one paper, become motivators of private and social investors. In the last column, I just mentioned the issue of which type of bank works better, specialized, multi-sector, public or private. As I said, it's not a matter of, I mean, there is not one answer because it depends on the quality of the bank and on the system where they are inserted. The landscape that emerges from the literature is of, let's say, multivariate space where private and public development banks can work together, maybe sometimes competing and sometimes collaborating, but looking for win-win solutions. Next, please. I conclude with this by transposing to the PDBs the triangle of microfinance, which is a very famous scheme in microfinance, in which financial sustainability, outreach, and impact are considered three equally important targets for a financial intermediary, but sometimes conflicting one another, and the way to make them consistent is through innovation. So technological innovation is one way, and it has proven to be widely used by some development banks. Innovation in processes also, and innovation in governance with linear management, for example. What about platforms? I think that platforms are an innovation and can also be channel for other innovations. For example, they could allow to share processes that may cut the cost and may increase the volumes and the impact of actions. They can allow more efficient and increase the funding. They can allow to share experiences. Well, I think that to maximize their action, they should benefit from interaction with other actors of the agri-food systems. And in particular, I would recommend to strengthen the relationship with the target customers and also with their grassroots organizations. So this type of approach could really boost the impact of PDBs for a sustainable food system transformation. I hope I was on time, and I thank you for the attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Viganò, for your brilliant lecture. You insisted at the end of your talk on the importance of cooperation amongst PDBs, and it's really the essence of the Finance in Commerce Summit to organize and foster this cooperation. And I know that a platform of cooperation will be set up after this event, so it's a very important thing to mention. Thank you so much, Professor Viganò. In your expose, you raised the importance and the counter-cyclical role of PDBs, their role in times of crisis. So now I will turn to Wencai Zhang, Vice President of the Agricultural Development Bank of China, biggest agricultural bank in the world. You have over $1 trillion in assets in dollars, if I'm not mistaken. Previously, you were Director General at the Ministry of Finance in China, and before that, VP at the Asian Development Bank. So you have a long experience in bank management. So I will turn to you, Wencai Zhang. Just maybe you can share your experience, how you were impacted by the crisis. Did you have to increase your volume of financing? Did you have more leverage? And maybe also Professor Viganò mentioned the importance of risk management and maintaining non-performing loans below a certain level. So we'd like to hear about the experience of the Agricultural Development Bank of China. The floor is yours, Wencai.
Okay. All right, thank you, Thomas, and I'm very pleased to join this very important event. I think I heard about the presentation of Laura's presentation. Very good presentation. I should say that you made a lot of interesting points, and particularly on the funding side of your research paper and also the suggestion side. I think we can take further look at your proposal and see how we can work together among all PDBs in this world. So but quickly, let me address Thomas' question for me. In 2020, ADBC, Agricultural Development Bank of China, dedicated itself into fighting the COVID-19 pandemic and helping realize stable economic recovery. After the outbreak of this pandemic, ADBC took swift actions to open up the emergency and green channel for the pandemic prevention and control. ADBC worked with enterprises that were designated as key enterprises in pandemic prevention and control, and increase credit support, real credit support. ADBC provided credit for the business resumptions with target on the micro and small enterprises, small, medium-sized agriculture-related enterprises, and poverty alleviation, food security, big production of important agricultural byproducts, innovation of agricultural technology, implementation of key national strategies, protection of the ecological environment, and the building of agricultural rural infrastructure. So that for in 2020, ADBC also provide credit online, through online to micro and small enterprises. And last year, ADBC has dispersed cumulatively 91.3 billion renminbi of pandemic prevention and control emergency loans, and 1 trillion renminbi of loan for resumption of operation and production, supporting more than 11,000 enterprises. ADBC also implement policy of deferred payment of the principal and interest, deferring payment of 58.2 billion renminbi of principal for the enterprises, for more than 1,500 enterprises, and also 3 billion renminbi of interest, also for the more than 100 enterprises. All the while, ADBC cut rates and fees to help enterprises overcome difficulties. The year-end outstanding loan was 6.15 trillion renminbi for the whole bank, up by 562.2 billion renminbi for the last year. Starting from this year, ADBC has continued to align pandemic prevention and control efforts with its effort to promote social economic development, food serving, rural revitalization, while ensuring regular pandemic prevention and control. ADBC has focused on the 6 areas of national food security, consolidating and expanding achievement of the poverty alleviation with effort to promote rural revitalization, agricultural modernization, agriculture and rural construction, coordinated development between regions and ecological civilization construction, further supporting agriculture and rural areas. From January to September this year, ADBC disbursed a total of 1.77 trillion renminbi of loan. This is a new loan for this year, and registered 6.67 trillion renminbi of the outstanding loans, up by 531.6 billion renminbi from the beginning of the year, making a new contribution to the efforts to serve the real economy of the country. So there's profound changes in domestic and international environment now pose higher standard for ADBC's dischargeable duties. Under the influence of the pandemic, some clients, small and micro size clients in particular, run into the operation difficulties, suffer higher credit risk. There are fewer quality projects, for our choice, and it's becoming more important task confronting ADBC is to figure out how to provide more financial services to the micro and small enterprises and to underdeveloped region of the country. We're having fulfilled poverty alleviation. You know that last year, right? We already completed our mission for the eradication of absolute poverty. This year, we face a new task of alignment to the poverty alleviation and rural revitalization efforts, which means more financial support, rural revitalization, to improve the development quality and the efficiency of the project. Plus, to fulfill the carbon peak and the neutrality goals, what we call 2030 and 2060 target. ADBC needs to contribute further to green development of agriculture and rural area, provide a greater green finance, and promote a green recovery and sustainable development of China's and global economy. So, Thomas, you want to also need to address other issues like risk management and also the how we are going to contribute to this sustainable green development.
Yes, Wencai. So just a minute, because we're going to ask the audience a question. So if the technical, if it's ready technically, you're going to have for the audience a question on your screen. And probably a QR code that you can scan to answer the poll. So the question to the audience is, what could be the main drivers for development banks to finance the ecological transition in the agricultural sector? So it's sort of rebound, Wencai, Zhang, on your last point on the quality of financing and how agricultural banks can contribute to the climate transition. Maybe if you want to answer that part, Wencai, on your role in green finance, ecological transition?
Yeah. Let me quickly address that, because I mentioned about our new focus on more green finance and for more support for the sustainable project, particularly for the ecological environmental project, for the sector. So we start to issue more green bond to mobilize resources, particularly for green finance. And of course, we have worked out institutional framework, policy framework for green credit project, and so we are. I think we are going to do more project. We try to get more green project into our pool for the support. So I think I mentioned to you already, right? I think we already issued the bonds, the green bond. With a big amount, so already, so both for the renminbi bond, also in the euro bond, also. So I think we are going to do more, and of course we are going to also identify more project, more green project, right, in the agricultural sector. A project like waste, solid waste management and wastewater project, and also the water supply, water project, and maybe the rural clean energy project in the coming days, like wind power, solar power. We are going to do more on that, and so we are going to prepare more project, more green project, and without more money there, particularly through the green bond. So certainly. We are going to do more. I can tell you right now, until now, our green loan balance already reached more than 1 trillion Chinese yuan, renminbi already. So that which account for already 17% of our total portfolio. So we are going to further increase our green credit in the next 5 years, what we call the 14th five-year plan from 2021 to 2025. So I think it's not an easy job, but I think we can make a more contribution for the country's goal for the 2030 for carbon peak, and for the 2060 for the carbon neutrality, what we call the net zero, right, emission. So that's what we are going to do in the coming days.
Thank you so much, Wencai Zhang, for reminding the importance of reaching carbon neutrality. Each country has a time target, but that of China is now fixed. And also I was surprised in the preparation of this roundtable by the importance now of green bonds in China next to the taxonomy that has been established. And during the discussion, you told me how now green bonds are being a bigger and bigger part of your financing strategy. Now I will turn to Souleymane Waigalo. Bonjour, Monsieur le Directeur Général. So I know you want to answer in French, maybe make very short sentences so that I can translate, peut-être des phrases très courtes pour que je puisse bien traduire et faire mon rôle. Donc, Monsieur Waigalo, donc votre institution, your institution, BNDA, has been confronted to the crisis. BNDA a dû répondre à la crise. Can you explain how you were impacted, how you reacted? Quels ont été les impacts du Covid-19 et comment avez-vous réagi dans la première phase, puis peut-être la seconde? Merci. We can hear you, Souleymane, le son est coupé.
Je vous remercie pour cette opportunité que vous nous donnez à participer à ce call. Et je rappelle que la BNDA est une banque nationale de développement agricole dans laquelle on a des actionnaires institutionnels comme l'État du Mali, l'Agence française de développement et la DG, en plus d'un partenaire, le Crédit coopératif. Donc, principalement, nous finançons l'agriculture. Globalement, nos octrois sont de l'ordre de 500 milliards de francs CFA par an et 39% de ce financement va à l'agriculture. Et quand vous prenez l'agriculture au Mali, ça occupe quand même 80% de la population et le financement de la BNDA représente à peu près 12% du financement total de l'économie.
Maybe I will translate to Souleymane. So Souleymane Waigalo is explaining that agriculture represents 80% of the population in Mali, and the rural activities in his bank, agriculture is 40% of his portfolio.
Donc, avant la crise de Covid, la production, en fait, le taux de croissance dans notre pays était de l'ordre de 5% pendant les 4 dernières années. Et à cause du Covid, on est passé à moins 2% de taux de croissance.
Production in Mali was rising by 5% per year, but due to Covid, it was reduced by 2%.
Donc, avec la crise du Covid, en fait, comme nous, on a des productions agricoles et principalement le coton, qui représente 15% du PIB. Le coton a été affecté au moment de la crise du Covid, du fait que cette crise est intervenue au Mali en début du mois de mars 2020, au moment où les prix du coton sur le marché international étaient en train de chuter. Et on devrait fixer également le prix pour les producteurs par rapport à la nouvelle production. Donc, il y a eu un impact du fait qu'on ne pouvait pas exporter les balles de coton qui étaient déjà produites pour rembourser les crédits correspondants dans nos encours. Et en même temps, on ne pouvait pas remplir les conditions permettant aux producteurs de prendre la décision de produire le coton, puisqu'il y a une forte corrélation entre le niveau du prix aux producteurs et le prix sur le marché international.
Okay, just a second. So when COVID-19 hit, the cotton, which represents 15% of GDP, was severely hit and the prices went down. So it raises two questions. First, the new campaign was not launched because the prices were too low, and also exports of existing cotton proved to be very hard because transportation costs increased and also customs were closed. So it raised issues on two fronts.
Donc, il fallait déjà pour le coton qui est produit attendre qu'on puisse exporter parce que les ventes sont faites sous forme de crédit documentaire, mais c'est seulement après chargement au niveau du port. Mais compte tenu de la crise du Covid et des fermetures des ports et des frontières, il n'y avait plus d'espace pour stocker même les balles de coton au niveau des ports d'Abidjan, de Dakar et de Lomé. Il fallait louer plein d'espace et garder le stock de manière à ne pas encore augmenter les coûts pour l'entreprise qui déjà le coût était en chute.
So all activity was frozen for a bit of time. Exports could not be done, so they had to finance the stocking of stocks, actually, because they could not be exported, and it increased, of course, demands for loans from BNDA.
Donc, de l'autre côté, le prix qui devrait être fixé aux producteurs pour leur permettre de produire le coton, le prix avait été fixé à peu près à 250 francs le kilo. Et ça devrait entraîner une perte de 3 milliards de francs CFA pour la société CMDT et une subvention de l'État. C'est-à-dire avec une subvention de l'État de 10 milliards de francs CFA et une perte d'environ 3 milliards de francs CFA, le prix auquel on pouvait payer le coton était à 250 francs. Et les paysans n'entendaient pas ce prix parce qu'avant, ils avaient produit et vendu le coton à 275 francs le kilo. Donc, la chute de 275 à 250 a fait qu'au finish, les paysans n'ont pas pu, ont décidé de boycotter la production de coton.
Because the purchasing price of cotton was diminished by 10%, most farmers did not plant cotton this particular year in 2020, which incurred losses both for the government and the national cotton company, CMDT, which had important losses of 1.3 billion CFA francs at the time.
Donc, ces discussions sont restées un peu tardives jusqu'à en plein hivernage et on ne pouvait plus semer le coton dans certaines zones agricoles parce qu'on avait déjà dépassé la période de semence au moment où l'État avait décidé de majorer de 50 francs le prix du coton. Malheureusement, les paysans n'ont pas fait de coton.
Eventually, the state decided to upgrade the price of cotton, but it was too late for the 2020 campaign, which is why farmers did not plant cotton.
Donc, on est passé comme ça d'une production prévisionnelle de 800 000 tonnes à 200 000 tonnes.
So the production of cotton in Mali was divided by 4.
Maintenant, les banques, nous, on avait déjà financé les intrants qui devraient servir à produire le coton. Parce que depuis le mois d'octobre, novembre 2019, on avait déjà commencé à financer des importateurs d'intrants qui devraient ramener les intrants parce que comme on est en pleine terre, donc il faut amener on n'a pas de port, donc il faut amener les intrants de l'extérieur et de traverser les pays du Sénégal, de la Côte d'Ivoire ou du Togo pour amener. Donc il faut commander plus tôt les intrants pour qu'ils puissent parvenir au niveau des paysans plus tôt. Donc de ce fait, l'ensemble des banques.
On the supply side, so intrants, in particular fertilizers, had been bought already, which of course raised the financing issues. Peut-être Souleymane, vous pouvez expliquer la manière dont la banque a finalement réagi, s'est sortie de cette crise? Maybe you can explain how the bank exited this crisis.
Donc on était obligé de reporter en fait, les engagements qu'on avait sur ces intrants. On était obligé de les reporter parce que comme les intrants n'ont pas été utilisés, il fallait déjà convenir de reporter, mais également sécuriser les stocks qui étaient déjà là et également les garder. Donc, il fallait trouver une solution pour poursuivre le convoyage des stocks, le gardiennage des stocks et la sécurité des stocks.
So BNDA eventually had to finance the securitization of stock over the campaign, to jump from one campaign to the next one, and to do some sort of bridge finance between the two cotton campaigns.
Et donc, c'est comme ça qu'on a suivi jusqu'à ce que maintenant on est arrivé à la nouvelle campagne cette année où les paysans ont utilisé l'ensemble de ces intrants qui avaient été en stock et nous avons reporté les échéances de ce crédit parce que ce qui fait que comme les stocks devaient servir à produire du coton depuis la campagne passée, l'hivernage passé, ils n'ont pas été utilisés, donc les crédits sont reportés, ce qui va entraîner un coût supplémentaire pour la société producteur de coton, mais il fallait que nous, on se rassure que ces intrants seront totalement utilisés. Et à la date d'aujourd'hui, ces intrants ont été totalement utilisés et nous espérons cette année une production de 750 000 tonnes.
So eventually, the last year's intrants and fertilizers were used for this year's cotton campaign. So Mali now expects a production of 750,000 tons, very close to that of 2 years ago. And eventually, all stocks of fertilizer and intrants have been used thanks to the bridge financing provided by BNDA.
Donc, du fait que le coton n'a pas été produit, donc il y a un produit très important qui est la graine de coton qui sert à produire de l'aliment bétail parce que comme on n'a pas d'hivernage pendant la période sèche est quand même très longue parce que les pluies s'arrêtent en octobre et ne reprennent que vers le mois de mai, donc il faut de l'aliment bétail, de l'aliment pour le bétail. Donc il fallait encore trouver des financements d'importation pour permettre aux huileries d'importer de la graine de coton de Côte d'Ivoire, du Bénin ou du Togo pour pouvoir au moins assurer la sécurité alimentaire pour les animaux.
And Mr. Waigalo also reminds us that cotton grains are typically used to feed livestock. So when the production went down, they had to finance the import of livestock feeding for last year's livestock breeding and export. So you can see all the consequences of the drop in cotton production last year, all the way to food production in Mali. Merci beaucoup, Souleymane Waigalo. Maybe a last word, peut-être un dernier mot?
Bon, c'est pour dire juste qu'il y a beaucoup d'autres acteurs dans la chaîne de valeur agricole ont tous été frappés par cette crise de coton, mais nous avons essayé d'adapter nos échéanciers par rapport à leurs capacités et à suivre pour qu'on puisse repartir et ne pas les laisser. Et ensuite, il y avait des producteurs également qui n'avaient pas fait du coton, mais qui avaient bénéficié des financements d'investissement et pour lesquels on s'est engagé aussi à trouver des reports de crédit pour leur permettre de refaire le coton cette année. Parce que sinon, s'ils sont en impayés, ils ne pourront pas bénéficier des financements pour reprendre la campagne. Bon, à ces mesures, nous avons bénéficié quand même des mesures de la Banque centrale qui a allégé les taux de refinancement et qui a accepté également qu'on puisse reporter les crédits impayés du fait de la Covid.
So overall, BNDA has helped all the value chain in agriculture in Mali, from cotton production to livestock breeding, but also with support of the central bank, which allowed to report certain credit installments due last year, which were extended to this year, which has allowed BNDA to support the country in general. Merci beaucoup, Souleymane Waigalo. Thank you so much. I will turn now to Maria Alejandra Riano. So you are research fellow at IDDRI, specialized in the financing of the SDGs and the alignment of development banks on these SDGs. You were already present last year during FIX 2020, and now there again. You publishing a new paper together with Damien Barchiche, also here in Roma with us. And your work, Maria Alejandra, suggests a new framework to show or maybe guide PDBs to be aligned with SDGs. So basically your work is not on the volume of financing, but rather the quality of financing and the compatibility of PDBs financing with the SDGs. So Maria Alejandra, what do you want to tell us about the quality of financing and how should PDBs align themselves with the SDGs?
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you to my fellow panelists. As you mentioned, today we are presenting a new study that we published last week as a contribution to this second edition of the Financing Commons Summit, together with my colleagues from the European Think Tanks Group. As we have seen from this morning discussions and from Laura's paper, the issue of aligning with the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs has a lot of interest among the public development banks community. But what we have seen is that efforts to align with the objectives are still scattered and are not really systematized at a bank-wide level. So in this sense, drawing from the results of the publication that we did last year, what we propose is 4 straightforward operationalizing principles for SDG alignment in a way that banks adopt a bank-wide approach, meaning that all their activities, current and future investments, need to be aligned with the 2030 Agenda, need to incorporate the holistic perspective and the interconnected perspective that the 2030 Agenda invites us to have, while at the same time being aware of not only the synergies, but also how to deal with the trade-offs. And this is of particular importance for the agricultural and food systems, in a way that, as we've seen from this morning, public development banks have not only the potential, but the role to contribute to having more sustainable and inclusive food systems in the territories in which they operate. Basically, the 4 principles that we propose lead us on a way on leading internally and mainstreaming an SDG culture within public development banks, taking into account not only how to get buy-in from all employees from top decision-making positions, but also from positions of project development, appraisal, and monitoring, and going also to taking into account how their intermediaries are also aligned. It's important here, and it relates to Laura's findings, to take into account not only public development banks as institutions themselves, but also being more cautious on how do they promote alignment with their intermediaries that in the case of second-tier public development banks are the ones with the responsibility of disbursing those funding given by public development banks. Also, it's important, and it's our second principle, to develop a holistic strategy with a long-term vision. Long-term vision meaning supporting the long-term transformations on the ground, supporting to achieve those transitions, and in particular for the agricultural sector, being able to support those small farmers and communities on the ground that seek to contribute to food security, to biodiversity protection, to better employment, gender, and all these positive synergies that public development banks can catalyze if they are more aware on the way that they disperse their financing. Our third principle is to mainstream SDG priorities within internal operations. This means moving away from project sole alignment to having a more comprehensive portfolio alignment approach, being aware of the different ways in which they can have a positive impact on the ground. Laura mentioned the importance on fostering value chain approaches, and this is something that I agree with, and it's an interesting way of public development banks, in particular for the agricultural sector, to promote SDG alignment and sustainable development on the ground. And lastly, for this first intervention, just to be short, the fourth principle is not only to mobilize, but also catalyze truly transformational investment. In here, I want to highlight that public development banks have not only financial services, but also non-financial services that are key to achieve sustainable development on the ground, meaning their potential role to enhance policy influence, to promote territorial development, the power that they have to support countries and regions towards sustainable development trajectories, and most importantly, to foster knowledge-based interventions. What we mean with knowledge-based interventions is to really understand and know your customer, understand what are the needs in terms of sustainable development that the territory in which the bank operates really needs, and acting accordingly to foster those trajectories and sustainable development transformations on the ground. Well, I can talk more, but I think due to time, I will stick to this for this first round of interventions.
Thank you so much, Maria Alejandra. During the first Finance in Commons Summit, we discussed the proliferation of standards for SDGs amongst development banks as an issue to be dealt with. So thank you for suggesting a framework. Maybe that's one step towards harmonization of standards. So we have the answer to the question we asked earlier in the sessions. So the main drivers for development banks to finance the ecological transition in the agricultural sectors. So today we don't have much appetite for punishment. It's rather incentives that attract our audience, whether to subsidize sustainable practices or enforcing incentive environment for producers. But less than 10% of our audience pleading for more regulation and penalization. And by the way, we do have a green taxonomy, but not a brown taxonomy. So maybe this answer echoes what we observe in real life. Before we conclude, maybe each of the panelists could ask, could make a very last point. I know we have to be quite quick. I'm seeing a request to cut the session right now, but maybe Laura Viganò, if you want to have just a last comment, and I'll ask everyone to be very quick in your last intervention. Laura.
Well, thank you. Well, the last comment is that I do believe in the role of PDBs now because they have, let's say, this challenge makes them focusing more on their, let's say, weaknesses. Having been involved in green and inclusive finance is not easy, but this instead of, the obstacles that they are facing right now can be overcome because of the idea that sharing together their experiences can also help them in overcoming their limitations. So it's a challenge that helps them reaching higher standards that can be useful also for other targets in the future.
Thank you for your optimistic conclusion. Wencai, Zhang, do you want to add a conclusion as well?
Okay, thank you, Thomas. Let me be quick to say something. I think we had a very good discussion, but because of time constraint, I just want to say that I like what Laura said. I do also believe the very important roles PDB can play. Well, different countries, PDB, they have different features and business modalities, but I think in general, I do feel we can do more. We can ask the PDB to do more, make more contributions to national and regional and global development, more sustainable development, more inclusive growth, more sustainable growth. I think certainly we can align our operation more with the SDG goals in a country at the country level and at global level. I think we are the development bank, right? Certainly we should support more development project, which means, basically in line with the 17 goals of SDG, right? I think. So I do agree, like Laura said, we need more innovations. We have been there for some time, and as a traditional important player. But as we move forward, it's a changing world. It's a new challenges. How can we do more innovations in the coming days? We should learn from each other. We can, do more innovations. I'm quite sure we can learn from each other. And we needed to do more coordination, cooperation among ourselves, right? So national, international, MDB, NDB, we all needed to work together and try to learn from each other, trying to improve our practice, our policy framework, our services, our product, so among many other things, right? So I think we needed to think how we can do a better job for the MDB family as a whole. That's what I want to say, but I think China, Agricultural Development Bank China, really is looking forward to that kind of cooperation. It's all my comment. That's what I want to say, Thomas, given the time constraint. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Wencai Zhang, for your determination to do more quality, more volume, more cooperation and more innovation. So that's a lot of work. Souleymane, Waigalo, peut-être aussi un mot de conclusion?
Juste pour indiquer encore que les besoins de financement restent encore très importants chez nous. Et on a besoin peut-être de réfléchir avec les partenaires sur une stratégie de renforcement des fonds propres, du fait qu'il y a un certain nombre de financements qui sont fonction du niveau des fonds propres, parce qu'on a une adéquation entre le niveau des fonds propres et le niveau des actifs pondérés, et également par rapport à la couverture des emplois à long et moyen terme. Ce qui fait qu'en tout cas, le niveau de pauvreté ou le niveau de collecte de nos ressources ne nous permet pas de couvrir nos besoins de financement. Et il y a une vraie stratégie à entamer dans ce sens pour pouvoir permettre aux banques de poursuivre le développement.
Thank you so much, Mr. Waigalo. So insist on the need of more equity. If we want to do more quality, more investment, we can only do leverage when there is sufficient equity. Otherwise, we will not answer the financing gap currently observed in the developing world and in particular in Mali. Thank you. Merci, Souleymane. Maria Alejandra, maybe a last word to conclude our panel, and then we'll have to close this session. Maria Alejandra.
Thank you. I would like to conclude just with an invitation for all public development banks to be bold and action-driven, to really achieve the transformations that we need to be able to talk of a true sustainable development, to foster the power of partnerships, because all development banks have different priorities, needs, and it's important to be able to work together. big multilateral development banks have the financial capacity and knowledge, but smaller subnational development banks and national development banks are the ones closer to reality with the knowledge of local transformations, and it's important to be able to work together, and in that way we will achieve the Sustainable Development Goals.
Well, thank you, Maria Alejandra, for insisting on the power of partnership, and then we'll have to close this session. I hope I'll see you later on. Thank you to our panelists. You were very brilliant today, so thank you again for your participation, and I hope we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you.